So, hello, I'm with Leyla Cardenas. I'm very happy to have this short talk with you, Leyla. My first question is, how are you after all this really weird period?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me, Audrey. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been really not so different from my usual routine because I have my studio at home and I'm used to being here, being quiet, very in this introspective exercise that is to develop artistic processes. But at the same time, for the way I work, I'm very used to traveling and going places and picking up materials for my work and photographing. And more than photographing is a documentation I've been doing of the city and the landscape around the city. So of course that stopped abruptly, like that discontinuous process of looking at places and going there, and this exploration that is fundamental part of the way I work has stopped. I think of course for all of us it's very challenging because it's a weird kind of a stop. No, it's not voluntarily exactly, and it's especially in Latin America, the way the government is handling the situation and the evidence, of course, of these huge social differences and distances, and it's very worrying and it's very stressful. Just think what is going to happen. So it's been difficult to work, even though it's finally this gift of time, not to be running for the deadline and for the next fair, exhibition, project, etc. But at the same time, this kind of overwhelming sensation that comes from the outside world doesn't leave you in peace. So you are quiet, but you are completely stressed out at the same time. So it's been a working process of finding inner peace and going back to work and concentrating in and definitely some of the things I've been working on have shifted in their focus or in their conceptual approach. So yeah, it's been really interesting, but very challenging and super sad in some cases.
Yes, so you are a Colombian visual artist, and we were just speaking about this word. Is it the right word to call you visual artist? And you answered me sculpture, and I really like the idea to have a sculpture with us in the Photo Basel virtual edition.
Oh, thank you. Well, I always think of myself. I learned to look at the world in terms of a sculpture, in terms of taking apart layers of things, understanding how they work in the inside, excavating the surfaces. So my approach has this question of materiality and time and space. For example, I work a lot, or my preferred method of working is actually proposing site-specific projects. I can approach space and think from it what the space has to propose and make up a project around the space itself as material. So, but photography sometimes is frustrating because, for example, I work a lot with ruins and urban debris, and I recollect these fragments and make pieces with them sometimes. But there are some things that I can, of course, not bring to my studio or work with it in public space. So photography has become this tool of making sketches for possible interventions, but as well as a way of thinking of this image of ruin. If you see my work, most of the documentation is around these surfaces that store passage of time, textures, use by humans, etc. So it's all these layers. So if you think in the world, if you think of the world in terms of layers, you are doing, I think, a sculptural exercise. And I think I approach photography in a sculptural way. I like to think like that. My photographs are never, I always think a lot about the materiality, about the shape, about the weight. I never leave a photograph alone, for example. I have to cut it, sculpt it, etc. So
yes, we need a bit of imagination to see your to imagine the real pieces, the real installations, because so we can see your work on 19 Galerie booth managed by Leyla Cardenas, and it can be a bit frustrated to see it on a virtual way because it's so three-dimensional, but we can really feel all the material. I read some bamboo prints mixed with concrete blocks, with bronze, metal, very different material. But photography, as you said, it's a real position in this approach and in this in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. It's very challenging, and I think. For example, for these events, we are approaching non-physical reality for a while. So we will have to, the first thing we see of the work is virtual, an image that is two-dimensional, and I'm always fighting with the two dimensions. My work is always coming out of the wall in some way. So it's a new, like, it's very hard sometimes to photograph my pieces. And to be able to have that sensation of course, I need a body and I need a spectator to be there in front of the piece, feeling it. Sometimes these works, for example, the latest works with the textiles, the threads that hold the image are really something that you miss on the screen. You really need to be in front of it and see that the thread maybe is vibrating, that has this reaction to your breath. All these little details are super important, and it's something that it made me realize to be here behind the screen and showing my work, and it's frustrating. It's you're missing half of it, I guess, but yeah.
Yes, but thanks to those pictures, we can have an idea. You talk about the space concept, but there's also a very important place for time and how to materialize the time. And I want you to give some words about this process, who seems very long, a long process with all the strings, and you move some of them. All this textile approach looks very precise and very specific.
Yes, those series of the textile started. It was a combination of things. On the one hand, I was working with I don't know the name in English. It's a wire mesh that has like a reticule. You know, like you have vertical and horizontal, and this idea of in Spanish we have this perfect word that is trama. And drama is used.
In French, is trame.
In French, is exactly. In French, it works. In English, no, because there's a weave or the fabric of the city is a different analogy, but it's something around there. So I was thinking about the fabric of the city, but also these vertical and horizontal lines that could hold images or architecture, no? Like it's when you have a demolition, for example, you have this wire frame that is the skeleton of the spaces. And I was working sculpturally with that wire, with that mesh. And suddenly there was like this possibility of making a transfer of the image into a much thinner and phantasmagory mesh that is the fabric I'm using, that is kind of a veil, a very thin veil, where you can do this process of sublimation. It's called sublimation, where you, by heat, transfer the image into the piece. And that started because all the images I was taking from the city, for example, from ruins, were usually facades of buildings that were about to disappear. So the photograph was really the documentation of the last image that we will see of that place before it completely vanished. So the imprint on the textile was the perfect way to make two things possible. One is, as John Berger used to say about photography, you have only two elements in photography: time and light. Mm-hmm. And in this case with the veil, I was transferring the images, and I was having that exactly, like light, time, and maybe all I was transpassing the material problem of the image, the support. No, I don't know if it's support or what is usually object. The paper. Exactly, the objectuality of the thing. It was becoming more like this ghost. And to take that exercise a little bit to the extreme, I started to take away you have in a textile, you have warp and weft when it's a basic weaving. So I was taking away the weft, leaving only the warp. So in Spanish is trama, is urdimbre y trama. I don't remember the words in French. I used to know them. And this analogy of a vertical line and an horizontal line that construct and hold the image was being pushed into disappearance. But what happened is that the image resisted to leave the thread. And as you can see in some of my works, I pushed that idea to the limit, having the image literally hanging from a thread. But I thought it was ideal to talk about these pieces of disappearance and sedimentation and ruination. So yes, it's a long reflection around and time, but how to maybe to register those I don't have the word in English for that. Well, I'll tell you later.
My question is, I wonder if those pieces are like alive. Are they moving? Because you talk about veil, you talk about this really light fabric. So, and Hélène told me that some of them are just pinned. They are hanged in a very specific way. Do you want them to seem like moving or being alive?
That was something that came about once I installed them in the spaces where they were going to be exhibited. I didn't expect that in the studio. Like, the process is very meditative in a way, to take away these threads slowly until most of it is gone. And but once in the space, the spectators and the wind and so many other conditions that happen in the exhibition space, it was interesting to start to see the pieces were really interacting with that movement of the environment. So, but that's a surprise that comes, and you never know what is going to happen. It depends on many factors. But yes, the idea is that they hang from the wall very subtly, like they are there but almost not there, like really like ghosts, like these apparitions.
They fit very well with this idea of virtuality, and we will miss, of course, this part of interaction with the object. But I was very happy to have this interaction with you, and I hope that all the public could have lots of information about those works through this exchange. Thank you so much, Leyla, for your time and for this talk.
You are welcome, Audrey. Thanks to you.
And bye-bye.
Bye. See you.